Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week I'm following up an episode I did a few months back about the original Trigun, now that I've finished Trigun Stampede. So this aired either last season or 2 seasons ago, back in spring, earlier this year, and at first I was definitely going to write this one off, because how could you, in good conscience, even as a nostalgic property, going off something as good, even come close? And in my mind, the entire time, the whole thing was, it doesn't have to be. Can it do something that it is trying to do something different with the property? Much like, say, a Final Fantasy VII Remake. I know people bitch about the 7 Remake a lot, but they are trying to do something that can stand on its own. And that's fair. It's a lot harder to do when there's not game stuff to do, but you don't... It's the same thing with the Yamato thing. Like, I liked Space Battleship Yamato, and that was a retread of stuff that was in the 70s. So I think it's one of those things with Trigun Stampede. It's one of those things where you're trying to reinvent the wheel that doesn't need to be reinvented because the old one exists. That having said that, little changes here and there are just bugbears, being investigative reporters instead of insurance sales and whatever stupid shit like that. Really what this show was a bit of a sea change in tone and focusing. And of course, as soon as they start recording, an ambulance has to start running by. Just perfect. I get to do these once a week, and of course, there's a goddamn ambulance. Anyway, that's gone now. Just thought I'd mention that. Anyway, sets the tone, exactly. But setting the tone was the important thing, because this is a property from 25 years ago that has a distinct identity. Trigun is both the most hilariously dumb thing you've ever seen, but also the most insanely poignant and sad thing you've ever seen. So how do you recreate that? Well, what Orange, the production company, did was they didn't even try to do the humor. So if you're wondering what Trigun Stampede is in a vacuum, what it is just by its lonesome, it is the last season of Trigun Stampede as the overall tone. There is some comedy, there is some action, there is some cool moments, but realistically, this is a somber version of Trigun. This is not trying to pussyfoot around the issue. It's almost a little bit lifeless and mechanical in a way, and that does extend to the visual style. That does extend to the the action and the combat, because there's only so much you can recreate with 3D CG, and I've said that I loved, Land of the Lustrous quite a bit because of what Orange did with it. But there are pluses and minuses to using that technology, and there's pluses and minuses to using that technology for everything, And it does come across unnatural. It does come across as lifeless, and it does take a little bit of time to really drive home that they're reinterpreting the old material in a different way, much like the Cowboy Bebop live action did. They're taking story beats and things but they're redoing it and reconfiguring it. Now, I think this succeeds better than that one did, specifically when things get going, but it's not perfect. Am I saying that Trigun as a property, the original 1998, 1999 one, is perfect? No. I do think the comedy can be a little grating in the first little while, but you can tell that there's definitely something in the surface that's leading you to that. And I said it in my original review, where without that stupid comedy and all the good characters blending together, that later stuff would have less impact. So you're going into this knowing you have the weight of that. Okay, who are the characters? Well, 3 of them are the same. 4, technically, though this one is a definite reimagining of Knives too. And you don't even have Millie as the comic relief. And that is what I feel is one of the bigger problems. But I'll get into that in a minute, because it's going to be hard racking my brain around every single change and every single thing that's different. But we'll start with where they went with the plot. This world is now called No Man's Land. They have cities, and some of the cities, not all of them, but some of the cities that they mentioned are still involved. The Lost City of July is kind of the big tipping point. You have plants, you have seeds, you have ships, you have all that stuff is relatively unchanged and relatively the same. So, what is different? Well, Vash certainly is different. They got rid of his spiky hair, and that was the biggest change. But again, this fits a more somber tone. And for anybody who's seen the end of it, I'm going to try and not spoil, admittedly, because that does change the impact for what things were going on. So it's not doing every single thing that the original Trigun was going. It's not in the same order. There's not the same things. So you have the same basic plot. Vash and Knives, now voiced again by Johnny Young Bosch, but a new voice actor in Austin Tyndall, who is Ruth in Magus Bride, who plays Knives. So they start out. They also have kids versions voiced by Kristen McGuire and Megan Shipman. Hello, Anya. Never even knew you were there. It's weird when she's not doing the Anya voice, but yeah, she gets to be Anya and the Young Knives. That's kind of a thing. Anyway, so they do the whole thing with Rem and the ship, and it's the same setup. Knives sets it up, uses Vash to do it. They crash land on a no man's land, and shit happens. They try to make a go of their own, or at least Vash tries to. Knives is off doing his own thing growing up as a mean-spirited fuckhead, because that's what he is in the original version. So 25 years go by, and you start seeing scenes of people who have been affected by Vash's appearance and whatnot. He tries to make a go of it with, a ship that is trying to terraform the planet. But there are just little niggles here and there that things are just not what they seem. So even though he's being helpful, there's this undercurrent of within the flashback that just something's off, and they find out what's wrong, and then they exile him, and then he turns into who he turns into at the beginning of the show. And the way they've approached Vash in this instance is they don't do the stupid comedy. They don't do the donuts. They don't do any of that stuff. He is just the determined yet dour looking Vash the Stampede. And it fits what they're going for, because again, this is meant for people who have looked for a different interpretation of the material. You're not going to get that kind of comedy. I don't think Orange could do that kind of comedy if they tried. Like, Phosphophyllite is kind of funny, but then eventually she turns very somber and less comedic. And the show, in turn, tries to be way less comedic. I'm talking about Land of the Lustrous. So, again, I think they kind of knew that if they were trying to do the silly episodes, the ketchup stains, the weird stuff, if you're missing that, yeah, it's going to drive you up the wall. This is not a one-to-one, this is the same guy. It's voiced by the same guy, which is weird. But again, it's not either on Johnny or the writer's fault, because it's just different. It's different because you're expecting a new interpretation, and you get it, but you're also like, where is the comedy? Where is that? And for me, I actually approve of that, because if you do comedy and it doesn't land, and I'm not saying that Trigun is perfect, because it can get a little cheesy, but it's part of the charm. So it's like half of half a dozen of one, six in the other, that phrase. Or I got the phrase wrong. Great. Sue me. It's 5:30 in the fucking morning. Anyway. But yeah, you'll hear that a lot. But for what they are doing, they're changing. So Vash is going around living his life trying to either repent or do other things. And again, that's been Vash's thing forever. He doesn't want to kill anybody, doesn't want to hurt anybody, doesn't want to shoot anybody, so he trains himself not to do so. I mean, he's still this overwhelmingly powerful person, but he doesn't use it. And it comes to a front eventually when a couple people call him on his bullshit, because they always do. There's an investigation in a town, I believe it's Genora is one of the first towns they go to, where they start mimicking the old material with, I believe it's the Nebraska family. And they definitely play the Nebraska family a lot harsher in this one. But they're going there, and Meryl, and not Millie. So Meryl in this version is voiced by Sarah Roche, and she's a reporter this time, but she's a rookie reporter. So that was a red flag, because in the original version, she was the curmudgeonly, I've been here forever, I'm overworked, you know. In this one, she's not bright-eyed, but she has a lot more optimism, which is kind of funny because she's not really optimistic. So, but at the same time, it's more of a recklessness as opposed to being cheerful, because Meryl is not a cheerful person. I'm glad they didn't do that, because if you're going to introduce Millie at some point, if you ever do, you don't want Meryl being the happy-go-lucky one. You want Millie to do that. So in this version, they avoid that. And really the big problem is the character they have to play the main guy, you know, the partner, so to speak. So instead of Millie, we get Roberto De Niro. And I see what you did there. It's not funny. Voiced by Ben Bryant. And if I had to sum up Roberto in one word, I would say, the old guy drinks too much and has too much time for this shit. That's his entire thing. And if I was to point to one single thing that drove me nuts this entire show, especially given how much luster and how much weight this franchise has, it's that he does not really have a character. He's just there to be the guy who's too old for this shit, which is fine. You know, you almost kind of expect John Swayze to voice him, given that that's basically who he is. He's like every John Swayze character, other than the dude from, what was it, Soul Eater, who is the Grimmery producer. You know, every like curmudgeon detective or curmudgeon old guy who's too old for this shit, who drinks a lot, smokes a lot. You know, that's fine in a vacuum. If I hadn't seen that character 5 million fucking times, and you're trying to set this show apart. So his involvement in the plot is to teach Meryl that life sucks and then you die. It's just kind of basic, you know. And I don't mind basic, but not in this franchise. If you're a side character, that's one thing. If you're a main character, if you're trying to be a main character in this, you have a lot you can do, even with the setup that they have here. And they don't do it. His whole thing is, you're driving me, or you're a rookie, you're being stupid, don't get involved, whatever, you know, because they're trying to follow a story of Vash the Stampede. The one thing I do appreciate is that Meryl doesn't really question Vash being who he is, like, 5-6 episodes. That was one of those running gags that I don't think the original got right. How can it be him? You know, that sort of thing. She does it for like an episode or two, but then it's like, all right, moving on. They're smart enough to avoid stupid pitfalls and stupid running gags like that. Really, where the show turns around, though, is for all my issues with, say, Roberto as a character, is Wolfwood, voiced in this version by David Matranga. And Matranga was a main character for Sorcerer Stabber Orphan. That's a name. That was way back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, if you can believe that. And then he was in Copcraft, a little more recent. But he's been in a lot more recent stuff for Funimation and especially Sentai. But the best way I would describe his voice is, like, how would I do it? And I mean this as a compliment because of the characters he does, but you've heard of the term resting bitch face. Well, he has resting bitch voice, because every voice I hear him do, it's almost like perfectly subtly just dickish. Whether he's trying to play that character or not, it just works. And for Wolfwood, in this interpretation, he's basically doing that. He's the Vash, you're fucking dumb. why are you doing this? Because he's trying to find him and whatnot. So the voice actually works in tandem, because again, they're not going for the comedic Wolfwood, the helps orphan. Well, he helps orphans too, but he does it in a more like dismissive fashion, just as a determined annoyance, as opposed to self-righteous and I'm happy and everything's happy and here's a confessional and that shit. So again, you can see where I'm going with Trigun Stampede, is that they are going for something a lot less frustrating. That being said, it doesn't have... It's like it sands off its edges, but it keeps some of them there because they're going down a path. Once Wolfwood starts showing up in the 4th or 5th episode and you start seeing his involvement with Meryl and Vash and to an extent Roberto, you can finally start to get this camaraderie, because the first 3 or 4 episodes you're just kind of like, I'm seeing the same thing over and over. What are you doing that's different? They start telling you different types of stories. They start interweaving different variations of some of those gung-ho gung characters, like how they were created, how does it build the plot. One of my favorite things about Trigun Stampede is the introduction of Zazie the Beast, who showed up for like half an episode in one thing and really did nothing because he was kind of a kid and didn't do shit. In this one, he's almost the main villain. If it weren't for Knives beheading people and killing people, and you would think Zazie was the main villain. It's kind of funny because he gets a lot of screen time and he gets to basically kind of weave in and out where he needs to weave in and out and start being a dickhead to people. So Zazie gets a lot more screen time, and that's good because you only have a couple of real main villains. You have Knives, who for some reason, this is one of those weird criticisms, and I actually agree with. Knives goes from, hey, he's Vash but meaner, to he controls like these weird tendrils of knives and like, yeah, it's like tentacle knives or forks or things. It's weird. Like they just curl around his body almost Dr. Octopus style and they just destroy everything. So I'm guessing that was one of those concessions that Orange made because, hey, we're good at this 3D CG shit. Let's just have fun with it. I do not recall that being part of Stampede of the original because it wasn't. I don't recall it being a part of the manga or like Badlands Rumble or anything of any interpretation. It was just something they said was probably a cool visual and it worked. And in those sequences it does, because again, we're getting to those visual spectacles. If nothing, Orange proved with Land of the Lustrous and some of the other stuff that they're good at doing this CG technology. It leaves a lot to be desired when you have the frame rate issues and whatever talking bits, because it's not very lifelike at all. There's not a lot of expression in the characters. They do their best. I mean, it's okay, but it's really when the combat starts, because that's what everybody, when they heard the name Orange, they were thinking, okay, at least the combat sequences, the fun stuff is going to be happening. Stuff like they're falling in a sandworm, or stuff in the late end of the show where they go into Lost July and you start seeing where Knives as a character is starting to lead you to go. It's starting to do a lot more big spectacle, and I do think the passage of time, that's really what most remakes do, is they up the spectacle, because these are things you couldn't do back in 1999. Think back in 1970, you had to focus on the characters and they were very basic and whatever. And I think the original did better at static gunfights. Like if you were standing right next to a dude and you had a skill set, you were just shooting a dude, that sort of like tension, those sorts of things. I talked about the Nebraska thing. It was played for comedy in most cases, but there was a tension still because it was just them across the room or across the town blowing shit up in just a weird tense standoff. In this, you're allowed a lot more like, hey, Wolfwood's crazy gunmanship can come into play, and Vash can turn guns into everywhere, and Knives can throw knives everywhere, and you're allowed to do a lot more cool sequences. A lot of stuff is still played for, okay, if it's really dark, there's only so much you can do, but because later stuff is played more at night. A lot of stuff mid-series is played at daytime, which is still effective. So it's a give and take in that sense. I don't think the characters themselves are as expressive as they were, because you're not getting the exaggerated faces and the hand-drawn feel. There's something you lose when you're not going hand-drawn. You're going for a more grounded. Even though you have a CG, you're still trying to go for something more grounded. It's tough to really balance that out. The combat sequences are really fun and really exciting, and I felt myself getting drawn into those things. And as far as the story goes, as far as what Knives does, the fact that he gets a lot more to work with is also good, because that was something that in the original they didn't do. He was the mastermind villain. He had his moments, and they did, especially in like the last 2 or 3 episodes, try to make Knives the important bad guy. But in the original, you were dealing with Legato half the time, because he was the messenger. He always got the screen time. You always kind of foisted all of kind of the anger down on him instead. In this, he's usually giving you flashbacks. He is the one taunting Vash and showing up out of nowhere. He's the one killing people. And that's where I think the show turned around, was that Vash... Ooh boy, spoiler, Vash Knives kills people. Who would have thought? You start seeing things like that, and you're like, okay, this guy's a lot more menacing, because he gets a lot more to do. He does things a lot more. He's still that conniving, sometimes brooding, mastermind, but he's willing to do more things for himself, by himself, because he himself can. So that is a big benefit. As I said before, Zazie getting a lot of screen time was really cool. They throw in a lot of I don't even know if you would call it genetic engineering, like weaponization of the plants. I think that's how I would phrase it. Weaponizing the plants for genetic material, and it is a different interpretation. They're not trying to turn No Man's Land into a wasteland. They're trying to turn it into a terraforming situation using the plants, and that's really where Knives' whole fit with humanity is. They're using them to survive. Vash is trying to say, well, they don't have a choice. But Knives is like, no, fuck you. I'm going to turn everybody against you and get fucking lost. So he's a lot more engaged in the plot. He has a more active reason, and you kind of find yourself not rooting for him, but sympathizing in a way, because the backstory of the original and this, and that humans are shit, and you want Vash to succeed, but you're also sitting there going, you know what? Humanity kind of sucks. I can kind of agree with him, because there's a lot of shit that goes wrong. And really, if you're looking into Trigun Stampede as a replacement for Trigun, don't. If you're looking for a more serious version of Trigun, that's essentially what you're getting. You're getting the last back half, like the last 7 to 10 episodes of the show without any comedy. If there is any, it's just banter back and forth. It's not there to, hey, look at us making funny faces. Let's do the stupid shit like pancakes and donuts and ketchup stains and bleh. No, this is a let's try something different. Let's go a lot worse, a lot more morose. Let's make Vash a little bit more dour and go in line with some of that later Trigun mystique, but fill in the gaps of what Knives was trying to do. Let's try to change around some of the subplots, and not in a way that makes it that it doesn't fit. Because you're not going to replace a 25-year-old anime, especially one that was kind of like at the forefront of anime is awesome for American audiences, because that was late 90s was kind of the boom period. So it's like there's a funness for Trigun, and I've said it still holds up really well despite its quirks. So I'm glad that Stampede is going for a different tone completely, but not kind of shortchanging the material. And especially if you see it to the end, you're going to be surprised. And I think you're going to enjoy it. Will you enjoy it as much? I don't know. But if you're looking for something a lot more serious, and you don't mind that, then this is a good variation on the material. Special shout outs to Kiev Baba, or Kvi, I think that's how you say it. Kvi Baba, and the opening theme. If you want like an opening theme that rivals some of the best OPs in the anime, just listen to Tombi. Like you could listen to that with and without context and be just like, fuck, this is fucking great. So yeah, amazing OP, interesting story, characters that are the same but slightly different because of the tone, a mechanical kind of intensity but doesn't seem intense at first. It almost seems kind of lifeless by intention. But even though the character looks aren't as good, I think the combat and the action sequences are better because of the new technology. So there are things to enjoy, and I'm happy that I stuck with Trigun Stampede longer than I thought I would. I thought after the first 2 or 3 episodes, I was not going to get into this. I was going to get annoyed. But once Wolfwood gets in the picture, things start to make sense. Wolfwood and Vash together, much less Meryl and Vash, and especially Roberto, because he's nothing, you know. Those 3 hold things together while you start piecing together what Knives is trying to do, and that is really the gel that makes the rest of the show work. Wolfwood getting in there at episode 4, episode 5 is really where the show picks up steam and doesn't really drop it. So I think for the 12 episodes that you get, I think this is a good start, and I think they have a good foundation to build in more of the old school Trigun, you know, stuff if they want to. So I would definitely recommend watching it. But that will do it for me today. And let's see what we're on the docket for now. So let me load all my shit here. All right. And Journey. There we go. Cool. So got that. Okay. So next week will be Phoenix Wright Trials and Tribulations, because it's the third year of podcasting. Might as well do the third Phoenix Wright game and do the best one. I got so much I want to say about Trials and Tribulations. It's so good. I mean, go with it. Next anime I do will be Interviews with Monster Girls. I gotta say, really freaking awesome. Very subdued for the source material, especially considering they could have went for a way more risque, you know, because I think there's a monster Musume show that is more funny. We're sexy monsters. Let's go. You know, this is more exploring teenage life as a demi-human, which is a cool theory because they don't really focus on any weird aspects unless you're a succubus, which is cool, but you'll know if you've watched it. But I thought Interviews was one of those shows that catches you off guard with how good it is, and I've rewatched it like 2 or 3 times and I've not regretted it ever, and I've enjoyed it. Going into September, and I think September 10th will be River City Girls 1 and 2. Talking about things I've really enjoyed over the last few years. The guys Way Forward who made Shantae also changed around. I don't think it's the same creators. I think it's different part of the studio. But the guys who make the Shantae games repurposed River City Ransom into like a girl power. You know, they took some of the female characters and made them the leads. So they took Ricky and Kunio and put them to the back end and made Misako and Kyoko the main characters, which is just lovely because you get to see these teenage girls beating the shit out of dudes. So that's all that game is. It's beating the shit out of dudes, but it's got a tendency to, not take itself too seriously. And anybody's played River City Girls knows that I'm going to love talking about that. But that's what we have going forward. I may throw in a bonus episode about quintessential quintuplets out of just I've been rewatching it and I'm just like bowled over. So I'm like, I'll just do an extra episode on that. I don't care. I'm just going to put it up. I'm probably going to do that just because. And, you know, I'm in that mode where I want to do an episode on that so bad because I want to finish watching it. Anyway, so I've got a lot of shit I can do. But that'll do it for me today, and I will see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.